There's a sentence that has been everywhere on the internet lately. Nothing is more dangerous than a man who wants a new life. And once you start looking at certain family murder cases, it's difficult to unsee the pattern. A marriage becomes an inconvenience. Children become responsibilities. Another relationship appears, and instead of leaving, someone decides they want to erase the life they already have. This week, we're exploring that idea through 7 different family tragedies. 7 episodes, over 7 days. And tonight for episode 2, we're going back to one of the most infamous cases in American true crime. Because more than 20 years before that sentence became an internet talking point, prosecutors were essentially making the same argument about one man. His name was Scott Peterson. His wife, Laci, was 8 months pregnant. Their son, Conner, was due in February. Scott had another woman in his life. A boat almost nobody knew he'd purchased. And according to prosecutors, a future he wanted that no longer included his family. Then, on Christmas Eve, Laci disappeared. Welcome to the podcast, You Can't Unhear. In December 2002, Scott and Laci Peterson lived in Modesto, California. Laci was 27, Scott was 30. They had been married since 1997, and from the outside, they looked like a young couple entering one of the happiest chapters of their lives. Laci was nearly 8 months pregnant. They already had a name for their son, Conner. He was expected in February 2003. On December 23rd, Scott and Laci visited Laci's sister Amy at the salon where she worked. Nothing about that evening suggested Laci was about to disappear. Then came Christmas Eve. Scott would later tell investigators that he last saw his wife that morning. According to him, Laci was planning to mop the floor, walk their dog Mackenzie, and do some grocery shopping. Scott said he left their Modesto home and drove to his warehouse. From there, he took his recently purchased aluminium boat and drove almost 90 miles to the Berkeley Marina. He said he went fishing. Later that afternoon, Scott returned. Laci's vehicle was still there. Her belongings were inside, and Mackenzie had already been found wandering outside with his leash attached and returned to the Peterson property by a neighbor. But Laci was nowhere to be found. Soon, her family was contacted, and police became involved. A massive missing person investigation began. Scott told investigators about his fishing trip, and police quickly started looking at his boat. There was something unusual about it. Scott had bought the small aluminium fishing boat earlier that month. People close to him apparently didn't know about it. And suddenly, the first time he said he'd taken it onto the water was the same day his pregnant wife disappeared. Even more important was where he'd taken it, Berkeley Marina. Police searched Scott's home, his truck, his warehouse, and his boat. Investigators found a homemade concrete anchor inside the boat. Scott said he'd used a 90-pound bag of cement to make that anchor and used the remaining concrete on his driveway. But investigators also documented circular impressions on the warehouse floor that became part of the prosecution's argument that Scott had made additional anchors. The defense disputed that theory, and importantly, police never recovered the additional anchors prosecutors believed Scott had made. Then there was the hair. A hair was recovered from pliers associated with Scott's boat. Mitochondrial DNA testing determined it was consistent with hair from Laci's maternal line. Still, there was no murder weapon. No eyewitness who saw Scott kill Laci. no confession, and no definitive crime scene showing where Laci died. The case against Scott Peterson would ultimately become a massive puzzle, made almost entirely from circumstantial evidence. And one of its biggest pieces wasn't discovered inside the Peterson home. It came from another woman. Her name was Amber Frey. Scott had met Amber in November 2002. She was a massage therapist and single mother living in Fresno. But there was something Scott hadn't told her. He was married, and his wife was pregnant. Even stranger, before Laci disappeared, Scott told Amber that he had lost his wife and that this would be his first Christmas without her. Laci was still alive. When Amber eventually saw news coverage about the missing pregnant woman from Modesto, everything clicked. She contacted police, and instead of disappearing from Scott's life, Amber agreed to cooperate with investigators. Their phone conversations were recorded, and Scott continued lying. During one notorious call, Scott told Amber he was celebrating New Year's in Paris. In reality, he was in Modesto, while volunteers searched for his missing wife. On January 24, 2003, Amber publicly revealed the affair. Suddenly, the image of the grieving husband had changed. Search teams kept looking across California. Police searched the waters around Berkeley Marina. The Peterson case became national news. Then, in April 2003, something washed ashore. Decomposed remains of a male fetus were discovered near the San Francisco Bay. The following day, the remains of an adult woman were found nearby. DNA testing confirmed what Laci's family had feared. They were Conner and Laci Peterson. And look at the geography. Their remains were recovered only a short distance from the area where Scott said he'd gone fishing. On the morning Laci disappeared. Christmas Eve. Suddenly, that mysterious fishing trip wasn't simply suspicious. To prosecutors, it was the center of the entire case. 4 days after Laci's remains were discovered, Scott Peterson was arrested near San Diego. He had changed his appearance. His hair and facial hair had been dyed lighter. Authorities also found a substantial amount of cash and several items that prosecutors later portrayed as evidence he might have been preparing to flee. Scott's family strongly disputed that interpretation. They maintained that he was in Southern California because his family lived there, and Scott insisted he wasn't running. But by then, the investigation had become a murder case. Scott Peterson was charged with killing his wife and their unborn son. Prosecutors argued that Scott wanted out. He had a pregnant wife at home, a child arriving soon, and another woman with whom he was imagining a different future. They believed he killed Laci, transported her body using his truck and boat, and dumped her in San Francisco Bay. The concrete evidence became crucial. Prosecutors argued Scott had created several homemade anchors, using them to weigh Laci down underwater. His defense argued there was no proof those additional anchors ever existed. And despite extensive searches of the bay, none were recovered. That disagreement illustrates something important about this case. There was no single smoking gun. Instead, prosecutors built layer upon layer. The secret boat, the fishing location, the affair, the lies to Amber, the concrete, the hair, the bodies washing ashore near the marina, and Scott's behavior after Laci disappeared. Scott's trial began in June 2004. Because the case had received extraordinary media attention, the trial was moved from Stanislaus County to San Mateo County. For months, jurors heard from witnesses on both sides. The defense, led by attorney Mark Geragos, argued investigators had focused on Scott too quickly. They raised alternative possibilities, including whether Laci could have encountered criminals connected to a burglary near the Peterson home. The prosecution maintained that all of the evidence, when viewed together, pointed to one person: Scott. On November 12th, 2004, the verdict came. Guilty. First-degree murder for Laci. Second-degree murder for Conner. In March 2005, Scott Peterson was sentenced to death. For many people, that was the ending. But legally, this case was nowhere near finished. In 2020, the California Supreme Court overturned Scott's death sentence. But this distinction matters. They did not overturn his murder convictions. The court found problems with how prospective jurors had been dismissed during jury selection in the penalty phase. Scott remained convicted of murdering Laci and Conner. In December 2021, he was resentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. And then, the case became active again. In January 2024, the Los Angeles Innocence Project announced that it was representing Scott Peterson and investigating his claim of actual innocence. And just to clear up something that caused confusion online, the Los Angeles Innocence Project is independent from the National Innocence Project organization. Scott's new lawyers sought additional DNA testing on more than a dozen pieces of evidence. The court rejected most of those requests, but one was approved. Duct tape recovered from Laci's clothing when her remains were found. His attorneys also continued pursuing alternative theories involving the burglary near the Peterson home, and argued that evidence overlooked or misrepresented at trial could point towards someone else. Then came the latest major development. In April 2026, a California judge rejected Scott Peterson's latest attempt to present evidence his attorneys claimed could establish his innocence. Judge Elizabeth Hill concluded that the material wasn't genuinely new evidence, but largely repeated and expanded theories that had already existed when Scott went to trial. His attorneys said they planned to continue challenging the conviction. So, as of now, Scott Peterson remains convicted. He remains imprisoned. And he continues to insist he did not kill Laci or Conner. Which means more than 23 years later, this case still generates arguments. Family annihilation doesn't always begin with obvious violence. Sometimes, from the outside, everything still looks normal. Christmas decorations, a house, a marriage, a baby on the way. And somewhere inside that picture, one person may already be imagining a completely different life. So when people online say, nothing is more dangerous than a man who wants a new life, the Peterson case fits so uncomfortably well into that. Tomorrow, we continue with episode 3 of our 7-day family tragedy series. Another family. Another home that looked ordinary from the outside. And another story where the people closest to the victim may have been the people they had the most reason to fear. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss it. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and I'll see you on the next episode of the podcast, You Can't Unhear.